My name is Amelia, and before I tell you this story, I need you to understand one thing. What happened inside St. Michael's Cathedral on my wedding day was not a breakdown. It was liberation. The organ was thundering through the vast stone arches, candles flickered against stained glass, and 200 faces turned toward me with reverence. Everyone expected joy. Everyone expected I would whisper I do. But my hands were trembling not from excitement, but from a secret that threatened to tear the roof off that cathedral. I felt the ivory silk of my gown cling to my skin like armor. The dress sparkled under shafts of late morning light. My veil pinned perfectly in place floated around me. I was supposed to look like a woman stepping into forever. Instead, I was a daughter and a bride, betrayed by the two people who should have loved me most. From the front pew, my mother's emerald dress shimmered like envy itself. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing pride for the congregation. Her smile was the mask of a woman who knew every camera was on her. I had always believed that smile, until yesterday. Now I saw it for what it was, an act polished to perfection. Beside me, Nathaniel stood tall in his tailored tuxedo. His blue eyes met mine with practiced devotion. He squeezed my hand, whispering, "Are you ready for this?" His voice carried that same calm confidence that had first drawn me in 3 years ago. Once those words would have steadied me. Now they cut like glass. "Oh, I'm ready," I whispered back, more ready than he could ever imagine. The truth thundered inside my chest. 24 hours earlier, I discovered that the man I loved and the mother who raised me had crossed a line so vile it defied belief. They hadn't just lied. They had carved me out of my own life. I looked past Nathaniel to the altar, to the candles glowing in gold holders, to the pastor who waited with the wedding book open. His voice would soon ask us to promise fidelity, loyalty, truth. Words that meant nothing to Nathaniel, nothing to my mother. And in that instant, the weight of the entire cathedral pressed on me. 200 guests, my colleagues from the publishing house, Nathaniel's partners from the law firm, family friends who had known me since childhood. They believed they were here for a celebration. They had no idea that this sanctuary was about to become a stage for revelation. My heart didn't pound with fear, it pounded with clarity. I had choices. I could let the lie continue bury my rage beneath the vows and walk into a marriage already poisoned. Or I could ignite the truth right here in front of everyone and let the fire consume the guilty. As the music swelled, my father stepped forward, proud and unsuspecting, ready to give me away. I felt my breath hitch. He had built his entire life on faith, on the sanctity of family, on trust. In moments that faith would be shattered, yet I knew he deserved truth more than anyone. I forced a smile, lifted my chin, and began to walk toward the altar. Cameras flashed, guests sighed at the beauty of the scene. They thought they were witnessing love's triumph. They didn't know they were witnessing betrayal's reckoning. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of war. And as I reached Nathaniel's side, I realized something vital. They thought I was powerless, too weak to speak. But the woman in this gown was no longer naive. I was ready to speak, ready to burn the illusion to ash, ready to choose myself. And that's when it began. 3 months earlier, I was convinced my life was a perfect storybook. At 28, I thought I had everything mapped out, a thriving career as a senior editor at Meridian Publishing, a fiancé who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine, and parents who supported me. My name, Amelia Darren, was whispered with pride among family friends. I had been the girl who always got it right, the grades, the job, the engagement. I was the daughter every parent wanted. Nathaniel was 31. He was devastatingly handsome son of a judge and a philanthropist, and a corporate attorney at one of the most prestigious firms in Washington. He drove a black BMW, wore suits that looked poured onto his frame, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had never once been denied anything. He proposed to me at the Kennedy Center during intermission of Swan Lake, my favorite ballet. I still remember the gasp of the crowd, the flash of cameras, the gleam of the diamond. It was every girl's fantasy. That night, my mother Diana practically glowed as she admired my ring. "You've done well, sweetheart," she said, her tone lingering on the word done as though I had completed some kind of financial transaction. Not "you'll be happy," not "he's perfect for you." No, her focus was on status, prestige, what this union represented. My father, a pastor for over 30 years, wrapped me in a warm embrace and told me he saw the love in Nathaniel's eyes. His blessing mattered most. In that moment, I believed my future was secure. The following weeks blurred into bridal showers, tastings, fittings, endless calls. My mother dove into the planning with a force that astonished me. She chose the flowers, the music, the catering, even insisted on overseeing my dress fittings. "This is every mother's dream," she would say, her smile so sure, her voice so persuasive. And I let her take control, grateful, even when she dismissed my own ideas. I wanted wildflowers in my bouquet. She overruled me with white roses and peonies. I wanted a simple string quartet. She booked a full orchestra. I wanted to write my own vows. She insisted on traditional lines. "Mother knows best," she said, her smile a mirror of my own. And because I trusted her, I yielded. Nathaniel found amusement in our family dynamic. He often stopped by my parents' house, charming my father with legal anecdotes and praising my mother's cooking. Sometimes I would be in the study finishing work while the two of them laughed together in the kitchen, their voices mingling like music. I thought it was sweet that he admired her devotion to making our day perfect. One evening in Meridian Park, where he had first asked me to be his girlfriend, Nathaniel looked into my eyes and said, "Your mother is remarkable. She's so devoted." His words warmed me, though in hindsight I should have paid more attention to the way his gaze lingered on her laugh. I should have noticed the way he always knew exactly which wine she preferred, the way her eyes lit up when he entered the room. But I was in love, and love, I was learning, is often blind. At that time, I felt untouchable. Colleagues envied my ring friends, envied my fiancé, and strangers envied the way he looked at me in public. I thought I had secured not just a husband, but a destiny. I was standing on a pedestal built by appearances, unaware that the foundation beneath was already rotting. Looking back, the signs were there. The way my mother's eyes sometimes softened when Nathaniel spoke, the subtle shift in his tone when he complimented her cooking, the small silences that stretched too long. But denial is a powerful drug, and I, Amelia, was its most loyal addict. If you're listening to me now, maybe you've had your own version of this. That season when everything looks perfect from the outside, but inside hairline fractures are spreading unseen. My story proves those cracks don't stay hidden forever. And before I go deeper, let me pause to ask, where are you watching this from? Share your city in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches, and if this is your first time here, subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Back then I believed my life was flawless, but perfection has a way of demanding a price, and soon the cracks would split wide open. If the proposal had been a fairy tale, the wedding planning was a royal production, and the director of that production was not me, it was my mother Diana. From the very beginning, she took charge with a level of intensity that startled even me. "This is every mother's dream," she would say, her emerald eyes flashing as she flipped through glossy bridal magazines or barked instructions into the phone with vendors. She handled flowers, food, music, invitations, even the seating chart. She wasn't just planning a wedding, she was orchestrating an image, her image. When I suggested wildflowers for my bouquet, she scoffed. "Wildflowers are for country fairs, Amelia. White roses and peonies are elegant. They'll photograph beautifully." I wanted a simple string quartet. She booked a full orchestra. I wanted to write my own vows. She convinced me that traditional ones were more timeless. Each time she ended with that same phrase, "Mother knows best." And I believed her, because that's what daughters are trained to do. But slowly the wedding stopped feeling like mine. It began to feel like hers. Nathaniel, of course, thought it was amusing. He would watch my mother's determination with an almost boyish grin, like he was charmed by her devotion to detail. He often dropped by my parents' house unannounced, carrying a bottle of wine he somehow always knew she liked. They disappear into the kitchen together while I took work calls, their laughter drifting through the hallways of our colonial-style home. Your mother is remarkable, Nathaniel told me one night as we walked through Meridian Park hand in hand. The way she cares about every detail, making sure everything is perfect for us. She's always been like that, I replied, squeezing his hand. When I was little, she'd spend weeks planning my birthday parties. Every detail had to be flawless. He smiled, stopping beneath the glow of a street lamp, cupping my face in his hands. Just like you. Perfect. Those words should have warmed me, but looking back, I remember the flicker in his eyes when he said them. It was admiration, yes, but not just for me. There were other signs too subtle but real. When my mother laughed, Nathaniel's gaze lingered a fraction too long. When she poured wine at dinner, his hand brushed hers almost casually, but not quite. My father never noticed, absorbed in his own world of sermons and scripture. And I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. Because who would ever suspect a mother and her daughter's fiancé, but the way she smiled at him, the way he found reasons to be in her orbit. The memories returned to me now like warning bells I ignored. At the time, though, I was drowning in deadlines, fittings, tastings, lists. My calendar was packed, my nerves stretched thin, and maybe deep down that's exactly how they wanted me distracted enough not to see what was happening right in front of me. One evening I came home from a late fitting to find Nathaniel already at my parents' house, leaning against the kitchen counter, while my mother stirred a pot of pasta. Their heads were bent close together, laughter tumbling between them. I paused in the doorway, watching. For a second I felt like an outsider in my own home. "Oh, Amelia, you're here," my mother exclaimed too brightly as though she'd been caught doing something wrong. Nathaniel was just telling me about a case at his firm. I forced a smile, kissing him on the cheek. But in that moment, I felt the first twinge of something I couldn't name. Not jealousy exactly, but unease. A whisper of doubt I quickly shoved aside. Because the truth was unthinkable. Looking back now, I see it clearly. This wasn't just my wedding, it was their stage. And I was the centerpiece, dressed in ivory silk, carrying flowers I didn't choose, speaking vows I didn't write, walking into a future built on lies neither of them intended to stop telling. But denial is seductive, and I was still clinging to the illusion that love and family meant loyalty. Before I continue, let me ask you this. Have you ever trusted someone so completely only to discover later that trust was misplaced? Share your experience in the comments. I read every story, and your voice matters here. At that point, I didn't realize my world was already shifting beneath my feet. The cracks were forming, and very soon they would split wide open. The first crack appeared one Wednesday evening 3 weeks before the wedding. I remember it so clearly because it was so ordinary. I had left work with my arms full of RSVP cards and manuscripts already exhausted. My plan was simple: stop by my parents' house, confirm seating arrangements, and then head home for a hot bath. Nothing about that day hinted my world was about to tilt. When I pushed open the front door, the house was strangely quiet. Usually I'd smell vanilla candles burning or hear my mother humming while she cooked. Instead, the silence pressed down like a heavy blanket. "Mom, Dad," I called, dropping my bag in the foyer. A voice floated from the kitchen. "Sweetheart." It was my mother's voice, but different, breathless, almost flustered. I walked in to find her at the sink, scrubbing dishes that were already spotless. Her hair was slightly mussed, her cheeks flushed pink. She turned too quickly when she heard me. "Oh, Amelia, honey, you startled me. I didn't expect you so early." I frowned. "It's 6:30. The same time I always come on Wednesdays." She laughed nervously. Of course, of course. Your father's at a church board meeting. Just me here." But something was wrong. The air smelled different. Not vanilla, not lavender. Masculine, expensive. Like the cologne Nathaniel wore sometimes, though sharper. My eyes drifted to the counter. A coffee mug sat there from the good china set we only brought out for guests. Steam curled faintly from its rim. "Whose mug is this?" I asked. Her shoulders stiffened. She turned back to the sink. "Mine, darling. I needed caffeine tonight." A lie. My mother never drank coffee in the evenings. She was a tea woman always. And I knew her tells, avoiding eye contact, over-explaining, scrubbing dishes compulsively. For a moment my chest tightened. Something in me wanted to keep pressing to demand the truth. But love is persuasive. Love tells you to believe even when your instincts scream otherwise. So I smiled thinly and said, okay, let's look at the seating chart. We sat at the island arranging RSVP cards in neat rows. But I noticed how her eyes flicked constantly to her phone, how her fingers tapped anxiously against the counter. And when Nathaniel texted me later that evening, saying he had to work late and would see me tomorrow, I caught the subtle shift in her posture, the way her entire body relaxed. It was such a small detail, a moment anyone else would have missed. But looking back, that was the first moment my heart began to whisper that something was terribly wrong. The second crack came a week later. Nathaniel canceled our Thursday dinner for the second time, claiming he was buried in work. I decided to surprise him at his Georgetown apartment. The doorman knew me by name, so he let me through. Inside the space was dim, but his car was parked in the garage. On the coffee table sat a wine glass, just one, but with lipstick on the rim, a deep shade I didn't recognize. My stomach turned. I knocked on his bedroom door. Locked. Nathaniel's voice came muffled from inside. "I'm sick, Amelia. Food poisoning. Don't come in." I stood there, hand pressed against the wood heart pounding. In 3 years together, Nathaniel had never shut me out. When he had the flu, once he'd begged me to baby him, but now he wouldn't even let me near. "Feel better," I whispered finally. "I love you," he said after a pause. Too long a pause. Those words landed wrong like a lie. Still, I told myself not to overthink. He was stressed I was tired, the wedding was close. That's all. But denial is a dangerous friend. It hugs you while it slowly strangles you. Back then, I didn't know the truth was already slipping through the cracks like water finding its path. But soon it would come flooding, and when it did, it would drown everything I thought I knew about love and family. A week later, the tension grew so sharp it was almost visible. Nathaniel had become distant. He canceled our Thursday dinner again, claiming work emergencies. He missed our cake, tasting something he'd once been excited about. Every excuse piled like bricks, walling him farther from me. I told myself he was stressed. A big case, late nights pressure from the firm. That was easier to believe than the alternative. But inside doubt gnawed at me. One Thursday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go to his Georgetown apartment. The sleek high-rise towered above the city, the doorman greeting me warmly. He'd seen me countless times before, carrying groceries or wine for cozy nights Nathaniel and I once treasured. The elevator ride felt endless. 15th floor. My stomach churned as I knocked. No answer. His car was parked downstairs. I knew he was home. "Nathaniel," I called softly. Silence. I used my key and stepped inside. The apartment was dark, blinds drawn air heavy. A half-empty wine glass sat on the coffee table. One glass. But there was lipstick on the rim, dark, unfamiliar, not my shade. My chest tightened. "Hello," I whispered. From behind the bedroom door came his voice, muffled and shaky. "Amelia, I'm not feeling well. Food poisoning. Please don't come in." I froze. That door had never been locked to me. Nathaniel was the kind of man who wanted to be cared for at the slightest headache. Now suddenly he wanted isolation. "Let me help you," I pleaded. "No, I don't want you to catch it. I'll call you tomorrow." His words fell flat hollow, too quick, too rehearsed. I stood in the hallway, staring at the door, listening to the silence behind it. The wine glass with lipstick burned in my vision. My instincts screamed, but my heart clung to denial. "I love you," I whispered, my voice barely holding. A beat of silence, then "love you too." A pause too long, too forced. I pressed my palm to the wood one last time, then turned and left. The hallway felt colder, the elevator ride heavier. By the time I stepped outside, the night air stung my lungs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. But instead, I convinced myself it was nothing. Stress. A misunderstanding. Maybe even a visiting colleague who'd borrowed his place. Love makes you blind, and I was stumbling in the dark. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every detail. The lipstick, the locked door, his voice. I told myself stories to soothe the ache. Maybe he'd spilled something and didn't want me to see the mess. Maybe the lipstick glass was a mistake from a visiting relative. Maybe. But the seed of doubt had been planted. and it was growing. Looking back now, I realize denial doesn't protect you, it prepares you to break harder when the truth finally arrives. Before I continue, let me pause. If you've ever had a moment when your instincts screamed but you chose trust, instead tell me in the comments. Sharing your story might help someone else see what they're ignoring. And if this is your first time here, subscribe so you don't miss how this all unfolds. At the time, I was still clinging to the fantasy, still holding the picture of a perfect wedding, a perfect man, a perfect family. But perfection was already collapsing, and soon the collapse would be complete. 2 days before the wedding, the truth came crashing down with the force of a tidal wave. And it wasn't whispered hints or lipstick stains anymore. It was undeniable, written in ink, staring me in the face. That Friday afternoon, my mother called me while I was at the office. Her voice sounded breezy casual. "Darling, could you do me a favor? I left the wedding programs in my car in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. I'm meeting Mrs. Chin from the flower committee, and I won't have time to grab them." Of course I agreed. 20 minutes later, I was pulling into my parents' driveway, my key in hand to let myself through the gate. My mother's silver Mercedes sat gleaming in the sun. I opened the passenger door, and sure enough, the envelope was right there. But as I reached for it, something else slid into view. A small black leather notebook wedged between the seat and the console. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice, but this one had my name written on the cover in my mother's delicate handwriting. My stomach twisted. Hands trembling, I picked it up. The first page was dated 3 months earlier, just after Nathaniel and I announced our engagement. Nathaniel Reed is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family. Instead, I settled for William and his middle-class ministry. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful for once. The words blurred as I read them, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a note or a random thought. It was a confession. I turned the page. He looks at me the way William used to before the years wore him down. Today, Nathaniel stayed after Celeste left for work. We talked for hours. He said I was wasted on small-town life. He's right. I know this is wrong. I know what it would do to Celeste if she found out. But when was the last time anyone really chose me? My knees weakened. I slid into the driver's seat, the journal shaking in my hands. Entry after entry, my mother's handwriting detailed everything. Their conversations, the stolen glances, the compliments that lingered. And then he kissed me today. God help me, I kissed him back. I kept turning pages, desperate to wake up from this nightmare. But each line drove the knife deeper. We made love in his apartment while Celeste was at her book club. He says I'm more passionate than any woman he's ever known. He promises after the wedding we'll find a way. I could barely breathe. The final entry was dated just yesterday. Tomorrow night, the night before the wedding, he's coming over while William is at his bachelor party planning meeting. One last time before he marries Celeste. After that, we'll have to be more careful. But we've come too far to stop now. I dropped the journal onto the seat, my entire body trembling. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with normal sounds. Children riding bikes, sprinklers watering lawns, dogs barking at mail carriers. The world spun on, oblivious to the way mine had just collapsed. How long? That question echoed through me. How long had they been laughing at me behind my back? How many dinners? How many family gatherings? How many quiet nights had been built on betrayal? Hot tears spilled down my cheeks, streaking mascara burning with salt and fury. I pressed my fists to my temples and sobbed until my chest ached, until there was nothing left but emptiness. And in that emptiness, a new clarity formed. They had chosen each other. My mother chose desire over loyalty. Nathaniel chose lust over love. Now I would choose myself. The old Amelia, the trusting daughter, the devoted fiancé, died in that car with that journal in her hands. A new woman emerged, one who would no longer be silent, no longer complicit, no longer fooled. The wedding was no longer their stage. It was about to become mine. I did not go home that night. I couldn't. If I stepped into my parents' house, if I looked into my mother's eyes, I might break before I was ready. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the streets of Washington until the glowing lights of the Willard Intercontinental appeared before me. I parked, walked inside, and checked into a room under a false name. I paid in cash, telling the desk clerk I was surprising my husband for our anniversary. The lie rolled off my tongue like second nature. In that hotel room, I collapsed onto the bed, the leather journal clutched to my chest. My tears had run dry, leaving behind a hollow ache. I spread everything out on the king-sized mattress, like a detective laying out evidence: the journal, the lipstick-stained wine glass I had photographed in Nathaniel's apartment, the memories of cologne lingering in my parents' kitchen. Each piece screamed betrayal. The old me, the Amelia who believed in second chances, who trusted blindly, who thought love could conquer anything, would have confronted them privately. She would have demanded an explanation, listened to their excuses, maybe even been manipulated into forgiveness. But that version of me was gone. She had died in the passenger seat of a Mercedes-Benz, reading her mother's words about making love to the man I was supposed to marry. What remained was something sharper, harder, determined. I ordered room service, barely tasting the overpriced pasta I shoveled into my mouth. My mind churned with fury and clarity. They had conspired to humiliate me, to make me complicit in their twisted affair. They weren't just unfaithful, they had built an entire performance of love and loyalty around my ignorance. That night, lying on crisp hotel sheets, I made a vow of my own. I would not be their victim. I would not quietly cancel the wedding and let them whisper their lies to the world. No. If they wanted to play games, then I would play too, but I would win. The difference between revenge and justice flickered in my thoughts. Revenge would mean hurting them for the sake of pain. Justice would mean exposing them, revealing truth in the most undeniable way possible. I chose justice, but I wanted it delivered with precision. I grabbed my phone and called Jenna, my assistant at Meridian Publishing. My voice was steady calm, though my insides burned. I need a complete guest list for tomorrow's wedding, I told her. Every name, email address, phone number, and social media handle. Send it to me tonight. Amelia, are you okay? She asked softly. Everything is perfect, I replied. And for the first time in days, I meant it. Next, I called Priya, my old college roommate who worked as a journalist in New York. I need you to be at St. Michael's Cathedral tomorrow with your camera and your press credentials, I told her. Something newsworthy is going to happen, and I want it documented. Amelia, you're scaring me, she said. I'm not the one who should be scared. The last call I made was the hardest. I dialed my father. His voice came through warm, unsuspecting. Sweetheart, isn't it bad luck for the father of the bride to talk to his daughter the night before the wedding? My throat tightened. Dad, I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, I need you to remember that none of this is your fault. Amelia, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I whispered. Everything's finally going to be right. When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at my reflection in the hotel mirror. My dark hair, my father's blue eyes, the face people always called pretty, but unremarkable. Tomorrow, I would be remarkable, not for a gown, not for a ring, but for courage. And as dawn crept closer, I realized something profound. They had destroyed my illusions, yes. But in doing so, they had given me something greater: freedom. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of my hotel room, painting the walls in shades of gold and pink. I sat cross-legged on the bed, coffee steaming in my hand, my mother's journal spread open like a wound. I reread the entries again and again, not because I needed to. Every word was already burned into my memory, but because the repetition strengthened my resolve. I had been raised to believe betrayal was a private matter. That family disgrace was handled behind closed doors, buried under polite smiles. But this betrayal was different. My mother and my fiancé had conspired not just to deceive me, but to humiliate me publicly, to parade their love through my wedding like it was their stage. That wasn't a private sin. That was theater. And if they wanted theater, I would give them a finale no one would forget. So I began building my plan. I spread papers across the bed, the journal, Nathaniel's recent credit card statements, ones we'd shared for wedding expenses. Line after line of transactions I hadn't questioned at the time. A $200 bottle of Bordeaux, my mother's favorite. A reservation at an upscale hotel in Georgetown, on a night Nathaniel had claimed to be working late. Small cracks I had painted over with trust. Now they became bricks in the case I was preparing. I wasn't just going to confront them, I was going to expose them. The first step was the guest list. Jenna, my assistant, came through quickly. By midnight, I had a spreadsheet with every email, every phone number, every social media handle of the 200 people expected at the ceremony. My fingers itched with the power of it. This wasn't just about personal vindication anymore, it was about truth. And truth deserved witnesses. The second step was securing the record. That's where Priya came in. A journalist, a friend, and most importantly, someone with a camera and credibility. You'll have front row access, I promised her. You'll know when to start filming. She hesitated, but I didn't. This isn't about revenge, I told her. It's about proof. The third step was the hardest, preparing my father. I knew he would be shattered, but I also knew he deserved the truth before the world heard it. That night, when I told him on the phone that I loved him, that none of it was his fault, I was planting the seed. Tomorrow he would see with his own eyes. As the hours crept by, I rehearsed in my mind. The moment when the pastor would ask if anyone objected. The silence. The congregation holding its breath. And me stepping forward not as a victim, but as the author of my own story. The thought terrified me, but it also electrified me. I took a long shower, letting the water scald my skin, as if it could burn away the remnants of the woman who had been so easily fooled. I emerged wrapped in a towel, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked the same, but my eyes were different, sharp, unflinching, no longer soft with denial. This wasn't just my wedding anymore. This was my reckoning. Before I closed my laptop for the night, I typed a short draft of what I might say. Words like dignity, truth, and betrayal leapt across the page. I didn't know if I'd use them exactly, but they anchored me. They reminded me of my purpose. I set my alarm for dawn, turned off the lamp, and lay in the darkness. My heart pounded with anticipation, not fear. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, because tomorrow justice would not hide, and I would no longer be silent. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day brides dream about. Sunlight spilled across the skyline of Washington, painting the buildings in gold. From my hotel window, the city looked peaceful, unaware that in just a few hours, St. Michael's Cathedral would become the stage for a scandal no one would forget. I sat at the small desk, still in my robe, sipping black coffee. My phone buzzed with messages from my mother. Good morning, beautiful bride. The flowers are perfect. The musicians are tuning now. Everything is exactly as it should be. I love you so much, sweetheart. Today is the most beautiful day of your life. Each message felt like a knife wrapped in silk. The woman who had stolen my fiancé was pretending to be the picture of maternal devotion, and the irony was unbearable. I showered slowly, letting the water wash away the last traces of the woman I had been. When I stepped out and met my own gaze in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My dark hair fell loose around my shoulders. My father's blue eyes stared back at me, steady, resolved. I was no longer the Amelia, who smiled politely while others controlled her life. Today, I would take it back. Driving to the cathedral, I deliberately took the long way through downtown. I wanted time to breathe, to steady the fire in my chest. Cars were already lined up outside the church, guests arriving early, bustling with excitement. They thought they were coming to witness a union. In truth, they were walking into a trial. Inside the bridal room buzzed with activity. My matron of honor fussed with her dress, the bridesmaids arranged flowers, the photographer adjusted his lenses. "You're glowing," one of them said as she hugged me. If only she knew why. When they asked about my mother, I forced a smile. "She's probably at home getting ready. You know how she likes everything to be perfect." The truth was, I already knew exactly where she had been. Nathaniel's phone had stayed at my parents' house until 6:30 that morning. They thought they had gotten away with one last betrayal. As my bridesmaids helped me into my gown, I felt strangely calm. The ivory silk slid over my body like armor, the tiny pearl buttons fastening down my back one by one, transforming me. The dress had been my mother's choice, of course, traditional, ornate, meant to impress society. Today, I wore it not as her daughter, but as her executioner. Kathleen, my matron of honor, pinned my veil. "You look stunning. Nathaniel is going to lose his mind when he sees you." I smiled, though my thoughts were sharper. Yes, he is. At 11:30, the photographer arrived to capture bridal portraits. I posed as instructed, smiling softly, tilting my head just so. He thought he was photographing joy, but what he was really documenting was a woman preparing for war. Then at 11:45, my father entered the room. He looked dignified in his black tuxedo, silver hair, neatly combed eyes misty with pride. "You look radiant, sweetheart," he whispered, taking my hands. "I can hardly believe my little girl is getting married." My throat tightened. Soon his pride would turn to devastation. But he deserved the truth. He deserved to be warned before the world heard it. "Dad," I said softly, reaching into my bridal bag. My fingers closed around the journal. "There's something you need to see before we walk down that aisle." His brows furrowed as I placed the leather notebook in his hands. He opened it, scanning the first lines. I watched the color drain from his face, his hands trembling as he turned page after page. "Amelia, this can't be," he whispered. "It's real." Every word I said firmly. "I found it yesterday." He sank into a chair, shoulders collapsing under the weight of betrayal. "What are we going to do?" "We're going to walk down that aisle," I told him, steady as steel. "And we're going to let everyone see who they really are." He lifted his gaze to mine, eyes brimming with tears. "The scandal, the humiliation." "The humiliation isn't ours," I said. "It's theirs." For a long moment, silence hung between us. Then he straightened, a flicker of pride cutting through the sorrow. "You're braver than I ever was." "I learned from you, Dad." A knock at the door interrupted us. 5 minutes, called the coordinator. My father offered his arm. "Let's go." And as I slipped my hand into his, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. And before I continue, let me leave you with this thought. Have you ever seen someone wear a mask so perfectly that you mistook it for their true face? Hold on to that, because in the next part, those masks are about to be ripped away. The cathedral doors loomed before us, tall and heavy sunlight streaming through their stained glass panels. Beyond them, 200 guests waited, expecting vows rings and a kiss to seal forever. My father squeezed my hand, once a silent question. Was I ready to carry through with what I had just promised him? I nodded, more ready than ever. But before we walked into the blaze of candles and cameras, I turned to him. "Dad, I need to tell you everything." We stepped aside into a small alcove, away from the bustle of bridesmaids and coordinators. My gown rustled against the marble floor as I reached for the black leather journal still clutched in his trembling hands. "Read the dates," I urged. "Read them all." His lips moved silently as his eyes scanned the entries. I watched the shock spread over his face, the disbelief morph into agony. This was a man who had spent 30 years preaching about the sanctity of marriage, the holiness of family. Now in his hands, he held evidence that his own wife had mocked every sermon he'd ever delivered. His breath came shallow. "Amelia, since yesterday? You've carried this alone?" I nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't tell anyone until I knew what I'd do. But you? You had to know before anyone else. He sat heavily on a bench, still clutching the journal. For a moment, I feared the weight of it would break him. "What are we going to do?" he whispered. I crouched beside him, silk pooling around us like a flood. "We're going to walk down that aisle. We're going to let the truth speak for itself. This humiliation doesn't belong to us. It belongs to them." His eyes searched mine, filled with 30 years of duty, of habit, of silence. For his entire life, he'd believed that family sins were dealt with behind closed doors. But this was bigger than that. "There are 200 people out there," he said hoarsely. "They came to celebrate love, not to witness this." "Exactly," I replied, steady. "They deserve the truth before they watch me marry a liar. Your reputation, my reputation, it will not be defined by their betrayal. It will be defined by how we face it." The silence was broken by another knock at the door. 5 minutes, the coordinator called again. My father's hand shook as he closed the journal. His face looked older, lines deepening across his forehead. But in his eyes something shifted, a glimmer of pride. "You're braver than I ever was," he whispered. "I learned from you," I said softly. He stood, shoulders squared, and offered me his arm. "Let's go show them the truth." We moved back into the bridal chamber where the bridesmaids waited oblivious. They adjusted my veil, handed me my bouquet of white roses and peonies, my mother's choice. My fingers tightened around the stems until the thorns pricked my skin through the wrapping. The sting grounded me. Through the glass doors, I could see Nathaniel at the altar. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, every inch the perfect groom. My mother sat in the front pew, emerald dress glowing, dabbing her eyes with feigned emotion. They were actors, both of them, and the show was about to end. The music swelled. The bridal march began. "Ready," my father whispered. "Ready," I breathed. As the doors opened, every head turned. Cameras flashed. Guests rose to their feet. They saw beauty. They saw tradition. But I knew what they were about to see was betrayal laid bare. I felt my father's arm strong beneath mine, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel alone. We stepped into the aisle together, moving toward the altar, toward the man who had lied to my face, toward the woman who had betrayed her own blood. The closer we came, the steadier I felt. This was no longer their wedding, it was my moment. And deep inside I whispered a silent vow, not of love, but of truth. Because today the masks would finally fall. Now let me ask you something before we move on. If you were in my shoes standing there with the power to reveal everything, would you have done it? Leave your thoughts in the comments, I want to know. The organ swelled, echoing through St. Michael's Cathedral as my father guided me down the aisle. 200 people stood, their faces glowing with joy and expectation. To them, this was the start of my happily ever after. To me, it was the stage where lies would crumble. Nathaniel stood at the altar, tall, and composed, his smile bright enough to fool a nation. His blue eyes lit up when they met mine, warm and convincing. Anyone watching would think he adored me. My mother sat in the front row, her emerald dress catching the light handkerchief, pressed to her eyes, in an imitation of pride. They looked like the perfect mother of the bride and the perfect groom. But I knew better. We reached the altar. My father placed my hand into Nathaniel's, his own trembling slightly as he stepped back. That gesture meant to symbolize trust, and tradition felt like betrayal itself, a handing over not to a partner, but to an enemy. Pastor Jenkins began the ceremony, his voice rising strong and clear. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Nathaniel William Reed and Amelia Darren in holy matrimony." The words echoed around me, heavy and ironic. Holy matrimony, the sanctity of vows. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but I kept my face composed. Not yet. The ceremony flowed through its familiar rhythms, the talk of love, of commitment, of unity. I stood silent, letting it wash over me, letting them think they had won. Nathaniel squeezed my hand from time to time, his smile unwavering. My mother dabbed at her eyes, theatrically glowing in her role. They believed the curtain was holding. Then came the moment. If there is anyone present who has just cause, why these two should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The cathedral fell into silence. For a heartbeat, even the air stilled. This could have been my moment to end it, but no. I stayed quiet. Let them believe. Let them walk closer to the edge before I pushed. The vows continued. Pastor Jenkins turned to Nathaniel. "Do you take Amelia to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part?" Nathaniel looked straight into my eyes, his voice steady. "I do." The lie rang out like a gunshot, brazen and shameless. My heart twisted, but I did not flinch. Then Pastor Jenkins turned to me. "Amelia, do you take Nathaniel to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part?" This was it, my moment. 200 faces leaned forward, waiting for me to whisper, "I do." My father's eyes were locked on mine from the front pew, silently urging me to stand strong. My mother's gaze shimmered with false tears. Nathaniel's grip tightened almost painfully, as if he could force my compliance. I inhaled deeply. Actually, I said, my voice clear and sharp, carrying through the sound system. The congregation froze. The string quartet faltered into silence. Even Pastor Jenkins blinked, confused. "I have something to say first." Nathaniel's smile wavered, his hand tightening on mine. "Amelia, what are you doing?" I pulled my hand free, stepping slightly closer to the microphone. Every heartbeat was thunder in my ears, but my voice was calm, steady. "Before I make the biggest promise of my life, I think it's only fair, to be honest." A ripple of murmurs spread through the guests. People leaned forward, whispers darting like shadows across the pews. My eyes found Priya in the back, her camera already lifted. She gave the faintest nod. I need you all to know I said that this wedding is not built on love. It's built on lies. Gasps broke across the cathedral, but I didn't stop. Because this was my vow not to a man who had betrayed me, not to a mother who had deceived me, but to myself. And if you're still here listening, make sure you don't miss what comes next. Because the truth I revealed in that cathedral didn't just shatter two people, it silenced an entire church. Subscribe now, so you'll see how I tore their masks away in front of everyone. The cathedral seemed to collapse into silence the moment my words left my mouth. 200 faces turned toward me, eyes wide, breaths caught. Even the candles flickered as if the air had shifted. I could hear the rustle of silk dresses, the scrape of shoes on marble, but no one dared to speak. Nathaniel's hand shot out to grab mine again, his voice low, panicked. "Amelia, don't do this." I stepped away closer to the microphone. My veil brushed against the polished wood of the pulpit as I faced the congregation. Yesterday, I began my voice steady. I discovered that my fiancé and my own mother have been having an affair. The words hit like a bomb. Gasps exploded through the pews. Someone dropped their program, the sound sharp as a gunshot. I caught sight of Judge Reed, Nathaniel's father, his face blanching white as marble. I found my mother's journal. I continued lifting the small black notebook from beneath my bouquet. Page after page documenting 3 months of secret meetings, lies, and betrayals. 3 months of them laughing at me behind my back. My mother surged to her feet in the front pew, her face blotched red. "Amelia, stop this nonsense." "Sit down, Diana." The command came not from me, but from my father. His voice, honed by 30 years of ministry, rang like thunder. My mother froze, then collapsed back into her seat, handkerchief limp in her fingers. Nathaniel tried to rally, lifting his hands in a lawyer's plea. "Everyone, please. There's been some misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I cut him off, my voice ringing. "Was it a misunderstanding that you spent last night at my parents' house while my father was out planning your bachelor party? Was it a misunderstanding that you used our joint account to buy the exact wine my mother mentioned loving in her journal entries about your affair?" A ripple of shock coursed through the guests. Judge Reed stood, his voice trembling with fury. "Nathaniel, tell me this isn't true." Nathaniel's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air. For once, the smooth attorney had no argument, no deflection. The truth was standing before him, undeniable. I turned my gaze on my mother. Her tears now poured freely, not delicate drops of maternal pride, but ugly, heaving sobs. "I understand perfectly," I said coldly. "You chose your daughter's happiness as the price for feeling desired again. You decided that you deserved my fiancé more than I did." "That's not true," she choked. "I never meant—" "You never meant to get caught," I snapped. The words hung in the vaulted space like smoke. The congregation erupted in whispers. Friends I'd known since childhood stared at my mother with disgust. My colleagues shifted uncomfortably, their sympathy clear in their eyes. Not one of them looked at me with pity. That mattered most. "This isn't about revenge," I told them all. My voice steadied, gaining strength. "This is about truth, about refusing to build a life on lies, about choosing myself when the two people I trusted most chose each other." I lifted my chin, my cathedral train sweeping behind me like a queen's robe as I turned away from the altar. Behind me, chaos erupted. Nathaniel's frantic voice tangled with his father's outrage. My mother sobbed into her hands as women from her social circle glared at her. Guests stood whispering, pointing phones, buzzing as news already began to spread. But I didn't look back. I walked down the aisle alone, not as a bride abandoned, but as a woman reborn. Every step echoed through the sacred hall, louder than the organ, louder than the whispers. And with each step, I felt the weight lift. By the time I reached the doors, I was free. And let me tease you, walking away from that altar wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because outside those cathedral doors, a different kind of fire was waiting to burn. Stay with me, subscribe, and see how the fallout changed everything. The cathedral doors swung shut behind me with a heavy thud, muting the chaos inside. For the first time in weeks, the air felt sharp and clean in my lungs. I stood in the parking lot, still in my ivory gown, the train sweeping behind me like a banner of defiance. The October sky stretched wide, crisp, and cloudless. Guests' cars lined the street, sunlight flashing off their polished hoods. From inside, I could still hear fragments of pandemonium, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the metallic scrape of pews as people shifted in confusion. But I did not turn back. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Instead, I lifted my chin, letting the cool breeze sting my cheeks. Cameras had flashed at me only minutes earlier, capturing what they thought was a perfect wedding. Now those same cameras would capture my exit, alone but unbroken. My phone buzzed relentlessly in my clutch. Calls from friends, texts from distant relatives, messages piling in from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all until one name appeared, Priya. "Holy God, Amelia," she breathed when I answered. "You did it. You actually did it." "Did you get it all?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. "Every second. My editor is already losing his mind. This is going to be everywhere tonight." "Good," I said simply, and I meant it. Across the lot, a group of guests spilled outside, their whispers trailing in the wind. Some looked shocked, some sympathetic, others hungry for gossip. I walked past them without a word, my heels clicking against the pavement. They parted silently like witnesses to something larger than themselves. I unlocked my car but paused before sliding in. For a heartbeat, I allowed myself to feel it all, the betrayal, the fury, the grief. And then, like shedding a heavy cloak, I let it go. Not completely, not forever, but enough. Enough to stand taller, enough to smile faintly as I whispered, "I'm free." Inside the cathedral, Nathaniel was likely scrambling to salvage what little dignity he had left. My mother was probably sobbing into her emerald dress, desperate to claw back the reputation she had destroyed. Let them. Their performance was over. The curtain had dropped. And I had taken the stage for myself. As I pulled out of the lot, my phone buzzed again. Social media was already erupting. Videos of my speech circulated like wildfire. Hashtags trended within the hour. Wedding revenge, bride exposes, affair, truth at the altar. Strangers cheered my courage. Some shared their own stories of betrayal, thanking me for giving them a voice. For once, I wasn't the woman who had been fooled. I was the woman who refused silence. Driving through the city, still dressed as a bride, I passed pedestrians who did double takes, whispering as I strode past in defiant silk. Some smiled knowingly, others simply stared. To me, it didn't matter. I had already rewritten my story. When I finally reached my apartment, I didn't collapse in grief. I didn't tear off the dress or drown myself in wine. Instead, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. The veil was slightly crooked. Mascara streaks ran down my cheeks, but my eyes were fierce, unshakable. That night, while the world replayed my confrontation, I brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window. I thought about all the women who would see my story, who would whisper, "If she could choose herself, maybe I can too." And in that moment, I realized something: my greatest victory wasn't walking away from Nathaniel or exposing my mother. My greatest victory was walking away from silence. Before I take you deeper into what happened next, the fallout, the wreckage, the rebuilding, I want you to pause with me. If you've ever been forced to walk away from something that looked perfect but was rotten underneath, share it. Comment below. This isn't just my story. It's ours. And if you're new here, join us. Subscribe, because the next part will show how betrayal reshapes not just families but futures. The fallout came faster than even I had imagined. By the time I woke the next morning, the story had already leapt beyond our community. Priya's video was everywhere: local news outlets, gossip blogs, even national feeds. Headlines screamed about the bride who exposed her mother and groom at the altar. I had become a symbol overnight, though not of romance. I was the face of defiance. Nathaniel's downfall was swift and merciless. His father, Judge Reed, issued a statement through the law firm within 24 hours. It was carefully worded, full of dignity, but the truth was simple. Nathaniel was taking indefinite leave to address personal matters. In Washington, law circles, that was a death sentence. No prestigious firm would risk its reputation by hiring a man whose betrayal had gone viral. By the end of the week, he was unemployed, his career in ashes. My mother's world crumbled more quietly, but no less completely. For decades, she had built her identity on being the perfect pastor's wife, the elegant hostess, the flawless organizer, the woman everyone admired. But whispers are crueler than shouts. Within days, she was asked to step down from 3 charity boards. Her lunch invitations vanished. Neighbors who once praised her garden now crossed the street to avoid her. She called me dozens of times, left voicemails full of sobs and pleas. I never picked up. And my father, his devastation cut the deepest. 31 years of marriage undone by the pages of a leather journal and the smug face of the man he had welcomed into our home. I watched him pack up decades of sermons and theology books in boxes, his hands moving with deliberate slowness. I can't preach about the sanctity of marriage when my own wife made a mockery of it, he told me. His voice was tired but resolute. He had accepted a temporary position in a small Vermont church, a place where no one knew his name, where he could grieve without whispers. He filed for divorce within 3 weeks. The word felt foreign in our family, almost forbidden, but hearing him say it was strangely liberating. My father chose dignity over silence, just as I had. Meanwhile, my mother moved in with her sister in Baltimore, the only relative still willing to take her in. I heard through neighbors that she rarely left the house, that she had become a ghost in her own life. I should have felt pity, maybe even guilt. But betrayal has a way of hardening the heart. Whatever sympathy I had left was buried beneath the weight of her choices. As for me, the world treated me like both a cautionary tale and a hero. For weeks, strangers stopped me in grocery stores, thanking me for my courage. Messages flooded my inbox, thousands of women sharing their own stories of betrayal, telling me they finally felt seen. The attention was overwhelming, but also empowering. I realized my voice carried more weight than I had ever known. Yet, in quiet moments, I still felt the sting. Nights were the hardest, when I would lie awake, replaying the moment my father's hands trembled as he read that journal, or the sound of my mother's sobs echoing through the cathedral. Justice did not erase pain, it only gave it shape. Still, I refused to let the pain define me. I poured myself into work, taking on bigger projects, finding refuge in words and stories. I applied for a position at a prestigious publishing house in New York, and to my surprise, I got it. Moving 300 miles away felt like a rebirth. In that city, I wasn't the bride from the viral video. I was just Amelia, a woman building a new life. My father called often from Vermont. He was healing in his own way, surrounded by a small congregation that valued sincerity over spectacle. We were both scarred, yes, but we were also freer than we had ever been. Looking back, I see the chain reaction clearly. Nathaniel lost his career, my mother lost her reputation, my father lost his marriage, and me, I lost my illusions. But I gained something far greater, a voice. And before I tell you how that voice carried me into a new life, onto stages, into books, into conversations that changed me forever, I want to know, do you believe betrayal can ever be forgiven, or is some damage permanent? Share your thoughts below. And if you're new here, don't just subscribe, because the final chapter of this story is about transformation. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I stood on the balcony of my apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, watching spring unfurl across the city. Cherry blossoms dusted the air like confetti, and the streets hummed with the promise of renewal. Life had shifted so dramatically that sometimes it felt like I was watching someone else's story. But no, it was mine. Every broken shard, every scar, every moment of defiance had carved me into the woman standing here now. My phone rang. It was my father calling from Vermont, as he did every week. His voice was calmer these days, though tinged with sadness. "It's beautiful here, Amelia," he said. "Quiet, honest. The congregation is small but real. I could hear the peace he was slowly reclaiming. What about you? How's the new job? I smiled. 3 months earlier, I had accepted a position as senior editor at one of New York's most respected publishing houses. The work was intense, the salary generous, but what I valued most was the anonymity. In New York, I wasn't that bride from the viral video. I was simply Amelia, a woman with ink on her fingers and a future she owned. I love it, I told him. I walk down the street and I'm just me, not a symbol, not a scandal. And yet the echoes of the scandal lingered. The video of my confrontation at the altar had burned hot online for weeks, spawning think pieces, debates, and hashtags. It eventually faded, replaced by fresher drama. But for many, I remained the woman who chose dignity over silence. Strangers still sent me messages thanking me for proving that walking away is sometimes the bravest choice. I carried those words like armor. As for Nathaniel, his attorney had reached out once claiming he was in therapy and wanted to make amends. I laughed bitterly, then told my lawyer the only amends he could make was to leave me alone forever. His name no longer haunted me. He was a ghost of a life I refused to live, and my mother's silence. She had tried to contact me through intermediaries, through old friends, even once through my former boss. But I had nothing left to give her. Some betrayals cannot be bandaged with apologies. Perhaps one day I'll speak to her, but not today. Not yet. One afternoon, as I worked through manuscripts at my kitchen table, the doorbell rang. On my doorstep stood a delivery man holding a massive bouquet of wildflowers, the kind I had wanted for my wedding bouquet, the kind my mother had dismissed as messy. The card read, "For choosing yourself." From someone who understands. A friend. No name, no return address. But I didn't need one. Over the past months, I had connected with dozens of women who had walked away from toxic relationships, who had chosen themselves over lies. We were a sisterhood of survivors, and we looked out for one another. Those flowers sat in my kitchen for weeks, brightening the room, a reminder that beauty is found in authenticity, not perfection. A year later, I stood behind a podium in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, looking out at a sea of faces, writers, publishers, readers gathered for the National Women's Literature Conference. My nameplate read, "Amelia Darren, keynote speaker, the power of authentic voice." I took a deep breath. A year ago, I began my voice strong. I stood at an altar in front of 200 people and made a choice. Not the choice everyone expected, but the one that honored who I truly am. We are taught from childhood that keeping the peace matters more than keeping our dignity. That being nice is more valuable than being honest. That other people's comfort should outweigh our own truth. But when you choose yourself, when you choose truth over silence, you don't just change your life. You give permission to everyone watching to do the same. Applause thundered warm and sustaining. Women approached me afterward, tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. My words had become more than a story, they had become a spark. That night I sipped wine in my hotel room, scrolling through messages online. One stood out, "Thank you for refusing to be silent. Thank you for reminding me that I matter too. My father texted me as well, watched your speech. Your grandmother would be proud." I looked out over New York's glittering skyline, the city alive with millions of choices being made at that very moment. Some brave, some cowardly, some that would change lives forever. I raised my glass to the unseen women who, like me, had walked away from illusions disguised as love. 'Cause sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's liberation. And if you've stayed with me through this journey, don't stop here. Watch the next story on this channel, another tale of truth, of courage, of choosing freedom over silence. Subscribe and stay with us, because your story might be the one that changes someone else's life. When I look back now, the wedding that never happened no longer feels like an ending. It feels like the beginning of the life I was always meant to live. Yes, the pain was real. Betrayal leaves scars that no amount of applause or headlines can erase. There are nights when I still hear echoes of the organ, still see my mother's tear-streaked face, still feel the chill of Nathaniel's hand gripping mine. But instead of breaking me, those moments built me. They taught me the difference between comfort and truth, between silence and dignity. Life since then has not been perfect, but it has been mine. I rise each morning knowing I chose myself. I walk into work knowing I belong there, not because of someone else's name, but because of my own effort. I nurture friendships that are honest, even if they are fewer than before. And I carry my father's quiet pride with me, a reminder that even shattered faith can bloom again. The world may remember me as the bride who silenced a church, but I remember myself as the woman who learned that freedom sometimes comes wrapped in flames. Sometimes you have to burn the script others wrote for you before you can write your own. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are never obligated to stay silent in the face of betrayal. You are never required to sacrifice your dignity for appearances. And you are always allowed to choose yourself. Because sometimes the best happily ever after isn't the one you planned. It's the one you create one honest choice at a time.